Welcome back, fight fans. Welcome the fuck back. Let's just dig right into it. Errol Spence Jr.? And this is actually a question that I was asked, and I'm just giving a response because, I get a lot of questions about Errol Spence Jr. People want me to highlight what I really think of Errol Spence Jr. People want me to just speak about Errol Spence Jr., how great he can be. And I think Errol Spence Jr. is a very good fighter. And the number one question that I'm asked, and that's why I had to make a response, was how will Errol Spence Jr. do when he moves up in weight? How many guys do you think he can beat? How great do you think he can be, and how far you think he can go? And so this is a direct response to all the subscribers who ask those questions. So let's just dig right into it. Errol Spence Jr. is an elite level body puncher. He's a very young and huge fighter for welterweight. And so you got to give Errol Spence Jr. his credit. He's a world champion. He's the IBF world champion. You got to give him his credit. Now, on the other hand, I don't believe he's an elite boxer as a whole. I believe he's an elite body puncher. So if we're going to be honest and unbiased when we, give you a true analysis of who Errol Spence Jr. is, we got to give it to you real. And so Errol Spence Jr. has already talked about potentially moving up in weight to 154 pounds, 160 pounds, and even as high as 168 pounds potentially one day. But typically 160 is where he stated that he would be most comfortable at. And so let's see if Errol Spence Jr. skills can translate. Errol Spence Jr. against a Kell Brook, who was coming off a knockout loss in an eye injury, had trouble those first 6 rounds until the injury caught up with Kell Brook. So imagine putting, this same Errol Spence Jr. in a fight against, a Canelo Alvarez, a Danny Jacobs, a Demetrius Andre. I just feel like that would be too enormous of a task for Errol Spence Jr., and I think that he would get stopped against any of those opponents. I just don't believe that he does not have the skills and ability that'll translate him moving up in weight to 160 pounds. Those guys are too good, they're too big, they're too strong. You have to realize that Errol Spence Jr.'s main advantage when he's fighting anyone is his size, weight, and power. So at 160 pounds, all of those things will neutralize. He's no longer the biggest guy in the division. He's no longer the strongest guy in the division. And he's no longer the heaviest guy in the division. So all he has to rely on at that point is his skill set. And his skill set is nowhere near the level of a Demetrius Andre, Canelo Alvarez, Billy Joe Saunders, Danny Jacobs. I believe all of those guys would easily beat Errol Spence Jr. So I just don't believe 160 is a weight that he can fight at and be successful. I believe he will lose to all of the top fighters at 160 pounds. I don't believe his skill set translates for a move up in weight that big. Now at 154 pounds, I think that Errol Spence Jr. is more competitive. I think that he can challenge a Jarrett Hurd, and I think that'll be a 50-50 fight. I understand that, Jarrett Hurd is a very big guy, and I think that he could give Errol Spence Jr. all kinds of hell. And I think it's a 50-50 fight if Errol Spence Jr. can get off his shots properly. And if Jarrett Hurd gets off his, we'll finally see Errol Spence Jr. tested at someone around his same weight. So I think that'll be a very good test for Errol Spence Jr. But I also think that it begs the same thing because Jarrett Swift Hurd is not fundamentally sound as well. He's a very strong fighter, but he has not proven to be elite. He is a unified champion at 154, so I can understand that being a potential fight that would be great. I think everyone would love to see that, but I think that it would make more sense because Errol Spence Jr. would lose a lot of the advantages he has at welterweight. Think about it. Errol Spence Jr. is heavily favored against Mikey Garcia. That's because Mikey Garcia is coming from 135. Errol Spence Jr. is heavily favored against pretty much, a lot of other welterweights. You look at a Keith Thurman coming off an injury. You look at a Danny Garcia. That's because all these guys are much smaller than Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence Jr. is the biggest guy in the division. And so that's why people realize that he has an advantage over these guys, but he is not the most skillful guy at 147 pounds. The most skillful guy at 147 pounds has to be Terrence Crawford and Keith Thurman. So those two skillful guys, I believe, would give Errol Spence Jr. a challenge and would beat Errol Spence Jr. at 147, in my opinion. I believe skills can basically overcome, just power and size. I believe more in skills than power and size. And let's just be honest and unbiased about it. Skills can go much farther than power and size, because what happens when you face a guy that's as big as you, as strong as you, or someone that can take your shots? You're automatically going 12 rounds. And if you're skillful enough, you can maneuver the entire fight and go to 12 rounds. So let's just be honest about that. The second thing is, what happens when you're someone, can you take those same shots you're dishing out? We've never seen Errol Spence Jr. in with a guy who's anywhere near as strong as him that could possibly hurt him. And so that's what would happen if he's moving up in weight to 154, 160. Jaime Munguia is huge. And so, as he continues to develop, I believe he's too green right now to face an Errol Spence Jr., but I think he could potentially walk Errol Spence Jr. down if he gets his fundamentals set and right. I think Jared Swift-Hurd may potentially be able to do it now, although I believe it's a 50-50 fight. These are fighters where I feel like they'll be an enormous challenge for Errol Spence Jr. I can't necessarily grant Errol Spence Jr. 100% being the favorite over many guys moving up in weight. Even against an Erislandy Lara, I think Lara would completely outbox Errol Spence Jr. because, once again, you're dealing with a bigger guy, a stronger fighter. You're not massively overpowering these guys anymore, because these guys, since they have on added weight, they can absorb more of the shots that you have. Let's not fool ourselves. Errol Spence Jr. doesn't have out of this world power. When he knocked out Lamont Peterson, I believe that was somewhere in the seventh round. Lucas Matisse stopped him, and I believe in the third. So let's not act like Errol Spence Jr. is knocking everybody out he fights in the first round. That's not what's going on here. I think he stopped Kell Brook in the 11th. That's not what's going on here. He's just not running over guys. He's having challenges. He's not the best technically and fundamentally sound boxer we've ever seen. And I hear this excuse from all these Errol Spence Jr. groupies. I'm gonna call them groupies because they're fanboys is one thing, but then groupies is another, because anytime you mention this guy, these guys come to his defense like an insult, or you're bashing him. And I would never bash Errol Spence Jr. I think he's a good fighter, talented, and I enjoy him, but I'm simply answering a question. Does Errol Spence Jr.'s skill set translate to a higher weight class? And I'm going to have to give you an honest and unbiased no. Once again, unbiased as always is the IBFP. Please share, like, and you must absolutely subscribe.